What's with the bottle?
Shoot the other day about Ingolosi yao. Boom, purely one, but that's something I've never seen before. Okay, right, starts walking. It's following the signs. Yo. Maga figure out since they've been waiting for him. It was never about the wings, Mkhukhu. It's the fire in you.
You were side piece for a married man.
Yes.
Who was married to a woman.
Yeah, he was married to a woman.
Just to be clear, you're not straight.
No, I'm extremely gay.
What are you laughing at?
No, the way he said it.
This is the Hustler's Corner.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Virtual Mkhukhu. Mkhukhu versus Parapageni, which happens right here on the Hustler's Corner. Guys, for those who don't know, we're building a podcast on top of another existing podcast. The podcast is called Virtual Mkhukhu. We will migrate the Virtual Mkhukhu podcast onto its own channel, which has already been opened, but we're going to migrate on the first Monday of 2023. The rest of these coming months is just for you guys to go and subscribe on the Virtual Mkhukhu channel. There's not going to be a lot of content. There's probably going to be short clips there of some of the content that we do here. But starting from the first Monday of 2023, we will be broadcasting Virtual Mkhukhu on its own platform. Right now, it's just piggybacking on this existing Hustler's Corner. And welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. First up, let's go to that sharp sign on the count of 1, 2, 3. Let's go. Click. Thank you. Let's go to that subscription button. Click. Don't forget to switch on that notification bell. The person we're sitting with today is a political analyst and author, a broadcaster. He has written 3 books, A Bantu In My Bathroom, Could I Vote DA, and Run Racist Run. He has a master's degree in philosophy and has written for many news media like New York Times, Guardian, etc., and he has hosted several radio and TV shows, including Power Talk and the Eusebius McKaiser show on Power FM and 702, respectively. He loves debate and has won National University's championship, represented Oxford University at the World Champs, and as a Madala, he's won the World Masters Champs. I'm excited that he's not just here with myself. He's here joining me and my brother, Penuel, the Black Pen.
DJ Sporang Grand, how are you?
I'm great and I'm honored and I'm excited to introduce Eusebius McKaiser to the world. Guys, welcome Eusebius.
Thank you so much, guys, for giving me the memo for the blankets. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. Jeez, and Pushubu Wakanda. I'm quite excited to be speaking to Eusebius today and learning from him. He's a bit of a controversial character. I know he's been dragged. Yes.
Controversial?
Yes. I'm saying this because we have a black majority who have been forced into racial politics aggressively. And because of that, when they get a sober mind and even an alternative political mind, I mean, a book like Would I Vote DA? It's like, no, this guy is a sellout. Very great mind. I've gotten to learn to appreciate a lot of his commentary, in particular because it's always sober. You know, he's not trying to buy face. He's literally being like, guys, but when you look at it at face value, this is what we're seeing. So I'm quite excited, looking forward to learning from him as well. Welcome, Eusebius.
Thank you. Are we going to be talking about Trevor Manuel?
Hey, no, cut.
You're looking good, bro.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're aging nicely.
Yeah, I'm not a fashion person, but I thought like, shit, if I'm going to go to a platform that you are hosting, let me try and be quasi-decent. So I bought this in Barcelona, Benetton.
Beautiful.
This sort of, I don't know what you call this thing, a poncho. And the viewers can't smell me, but I also try to smell nice. It is always smelling nice. So
Yes.
I think you too, man.
No, hey! Uspuda's the style fashion icon here.
Today I'm smelling finesse.
Come on.
By drip.
Come on.
I'm drinking Mofire.
By DJ
I'm
Smooth.
wearing Zeitgeist.
Yeah,
Come
I've
on.
got coffee here,
Trevor,
and
it's
he put
like-
in a shot of Mofire.
Wearing local brands, you know? So it's good to see Eusebius. It's also good to see him looking healthy.
Yeah.
And I can see his beard has grown. So big up to the
Beard gang. Beard gang. Huh? Rick Ross.
Now we are in that age now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although I think you mustn't age us too much because you and I are similar age. And
Yeah,
you keep
I
talking
think so.
about younger people like having had enough. And I think I was like, oh God, are you like suggesting we're already over the hill?
But we're still lighties, bro.
Yeah, by ANC Youth League definitions, we're still
I think you're a lighty until you're 35, right?
Technically, in this country, our youth is up to 35.
technically, yeah.
Technically.
But for me, I believe youth is 30 years and younger.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree
yeah.
with you.
Yeah, I would
25
agree
to
with that.
30 for me is still young.
Yeah.
30 to 35 is actually a
But
bit
the
old.
conundrum in our politics, Fikile is regarded as still young in the ANC.
Yo,
The
that's
guy's
shocking.
already 50. So it all depends. you
It's
know?
shocking.
Are you talking ANC definition or normal definition?
Jeez, or soccer age.
Yeah.
Or soccer age?
I think let's maybe take it back before we get into current conversations. Maybe I've never heard Eusebius' story. Maybe just to summarize your story.
Look, I grew up in the Eastern Cape. I'm from Grahamstown. That's now Makhanda. And like the majority of people in the country, I come from a poor working class background, combination of the two. Grew up in a predominantly colored neighborhood in the 80s. Grew up Afrikaans. Primary school was homogenous Afrikaans, Catholic run school. And our generation was the first generation of coconut. So in the early 90s, I had a chance to go to a former whites only school, Graham College Boys High.
Hey,
And
shout out to Graham.
Yes, to Graham. And it was only the second year that schools had been, racially integrated, former white schools anyway. And I couldn't speak English when I started in Standard 6, back then when we had 4 provinces. And then, by the end of high school, I had done a lot of debating and public speaking. I love current affairs. I was a nerdish kid, a teacher's pet, very quiet, if you can believe it. Extremely quiet. Debating made me an extrovert. Until then, I was very timid. And then I decided to go to university, thought I'd become a lawyer, didn't enjoy law, preferred philosophy. So ended up studying law and philosophy. Cut a long story short, after some years in England, came back to South Africa, had a small nyana stint in management consulting. And then I just missed having an audience because as a debater, you always have an audience at the podium. And I listened to a lot of talk radio in Joburg and I thought, shit, man, I can be a talk host as well. Some of these guys are asking inane questions. I can ask them too. Knocked at 702's door and they said, nope, you are too academic. You're going to lose our audience. But we'll give you a chance late night on a Sunday, my first show. And I haven't looked back since. And then I've been in radio, TV, and just writing.
Incredible and interesting. Have you also been part of debating teams when you were young?
I was, not by choice.
Yeah.
I was forced. It sucks being a good academic student because then your teachers all are like, no, you must. I debated in high school, so I'm from Newcastle,
Okay.
KwaZulu. I was in Makhanda, Ekhini, for 4 or 5 years because I went to Rhodes as well.
Okay.
So I know Joza, I know Mary Waters, I know
Rattan
Kingswood
Parrot.
College. I loved Rhodes very much, but again, I got there accidentally because my mom wanted me to go somewhere unique. Everyone from where I come from wanted to go to Wits, some wanted to go to UJ, some went to UKZN because we're in KZN.
Yeah.
And I ended up at Rhodes and I loved it thoroughly. And I know for a fact that people that are there for that duration, there's something unique about it.
Yes.
I don't want to sing praises of Rhodes, but there's something about that town and the students running the town. I did.
How?
I never drank. I guess I'm really
What
stubborn.
were you doing? BSc?
I was doing accounting. But it's got
okay.
nothing to do with accounting. I'm just a stubborn guy, I think.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was
No wonder
fascinated.
your skin is so clear.
There's mates of mine from Grahamstown. I think the jury's family.
Yes. The rugby playing ones.
Yes, Speckman family as
Yeah,
well.
I know them very well.
So
I
I've
was
got
in
a
primary school
very...
with them,
Really?
with Fabian.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I've got a very soft spot for Grahamstown. I thought I was going to be there for much longer. And I'm very sad that the town hasn't developed. So maybe that will be my first question to you. As an example for other small towns in the country, what is wrong in Grahamstown? What is wrong even in the Eastern Cape, in your opinion?
Listen, that's that's an on-point question. If you were to do a documentary on Grahamstown, Makhanda, Ekhini, and its degradation, it is a snapshot into what's wrong with the entire province and the country.
Yeah.
Literally, every single thing. I mean, I go back 2-3 times a year, if I can, university or to visit family because my family is still there.
Sure.
The potholes are gigantic. The water provision is crappy. The finances are horrible. Refuse removal doesn't happen. It used to be a quote-unquote safe space for families to send their kids. Well, if you're middle class, they can go to these fancy schools and it's a good place. It's got the high court there provincially. Of course, with the festival, it's also significant culturally. But now it is a shadow of its former self, completely, to the point where the citizens have had to put their differences aside, town and gown, and with the unemployed people's movement, with Ayanda Kota, and with one or two people from the posh side of town cooperating to challenge the ANC and the DA, and to run as a civic-based organization, basically, in the local elections, to see whether they can take over the money and do a better job of running the municipality. They also instituted legal action to force Bisho to take over the municipality because it wasn't fulfilling its legal duties. Yeah. And so the long and short of it is that, the state of Makhanda is the state of the country. And the lack of faith that the citizens have in all the political players, be it DA or ANC, also tells you just how jaded the citizens of Makhanda actually are. I'm sad when I go home, especially Joza, Kanda Township, if you know Grahamstown well, Ghost Town, and other areas, Hoogenoeg, Vergenoeg. People just look defeated. It's like they don't have a stake in the country and in the country's economy and democracy. And unemployment levels there are probably higher than what it is nationally.
I can imagine.
And so it's really, really sad.
It hurts, eh?
It does hurt. Absolutely. You feel like a survivor if you go back and you come from Jozi. It's like you have survivor's guilt.
Do you personally think education is the key? I'm asking this because Zimbabweans are quite literate and quite educated, but they seem to be struggling to solve their own problems. Grahamstown is known as an educational town. It's got some of the best schools in the country, and it's got Rhodes universities where some of the greatest leaders in the country and even in other parts of the world. It's like, but you guys had an education institution there. Why has it failed to transform a small town into maybe like a Stellenbosch, for example? Do you think education is the answer, or is there something that we're missing? Because
you're asking deep questions early on in our discussions.
Sorry.
Look, yes and no, in the sense that Zimbabwe is a good example that you can have an educated population and you can still have a political elite that preys on the entire society. Zim in the 80s was incredible. When I was at Rhodes in the late 90s all the way until the mid 2000s, it was a wake-up call to me as a South African that hadn't traveled anywhere and who thought that anything north of Limpopo must be not quite as cool as South Africa.
True.
And suddenly you have to deal with all these like Zim students
at
who
Rhodes,
are fancier than us, who
at
are
Rhodes,
more cosmopolitan at Rhodes, who are smarter than us, who've done A-levels, for whom first year is a joke, while we catch up to where they were at the end of schooling. But then you fast forward into 2000 and then thereon, and Zim just starts falling apart. And the lesson of Zim is that even when your revolutionaries become your first government and they invest in things like education, if you don't have proper oversight, and if the educated class is not actively involved in keeping a close eye over the politicians and getting actively involved in politics, then your society can fall apart because they can get on with mischief while you are looking away. And part of the reason why I'm speaking so passionately about it is that yesterday I finished Songezo Zibi's book, Manifesto, which is out now. And it is the main thing that he says. He addresses the three of us in the book. And he says, professional class, I'm speaking to you. We outsource activism to the poor and to the working class, and we retreat as the professional class because we don't want to get our hands dirty and get involved in politics. What are the chances of us running to be an independent council of our wards, for example? So that's a long way to say that the direct answer to your question is education helps. But unless the middle class and the educated class and the professional class is prepared to actually get inside the political arena, the people who put up their hands to be in the political arena, they get to control the levers of power.
Of course.
Somebody was saying that, like, a lot of us are not interested in politics on campus. And then we get surprised who's leading us 10 years later.
100%. That's exactly true. And I was one of those students at Rhodes. I got there, I had good funding, I had some good bursaries. And for me, SRC politics were for poor kids who desperately want to explain why they shouldn't be academically or financially excluded.
You're right.
So if you didn't face academic or financial exclusion, SASCO et al. Were not for you. And now you realize actually there's a pathway from those kids to who goes into the state eventually. And then 20 years later, you want to bitch and moan and call into John Robbie and say, what are they doing with my taxes? But you abdicated your responsibility as an active citizen by not getting involved, and now you want to be bitching and moaning and writing strongly worded letters to the staff. That's not going to change society. So we should get involved. I'm not. I don't know if you guys are, but that is the problem with the middle class and with the professional class, which includes myself.
And I realize the middle class is quite petrified because they end up becoming a buffer between a minority elite because they're scared of losing their jobs. They're scared to even tweet certain things because they just like, my employers are watching, but that takes away all their power.
They're scared to face on Trevor Manuel in court
They
because they think of their podcast.
I'm going to lose my job and go hung. So it's very scary for me.
You are absolutely on point. Here's a quote from Manifesto by Songezo Zibi. Go and buy it, by the way. This is not a paid-for endorsement. As a book reviewer, he says the following. I've come to the conclusion the destruction of the economy and state dysfunction will soon make it pointless to remain silent, to protect a sheltered lifestyle of suburban residential complexes and large houses. In any event, those who live that life, which is us, are a month or two away from pennilessness in the event that they lose their jobs. But then here's the important two sentences. We've been cowed into silence, your point, by fear of losing income if we speak out either against corporate discrimination or the corruption and incompetence of the political elites. But here's the most important thing for us as middle-class people. But we arrived at the point where the advantages of silence diminish by the day as national collapse intrudes on daily life with load-shedding, water cuts, etc.
Yeah.
And he's right.
Yeah.
What is the cost of silence and bitching and moaning?
Spot on.
It's easy to be captured in a society that's functioning and keep quiet and turn a blind eye, which happened with the bulk of the white people during apartheid.
Spot on.
It suited them. And when it no longer suits them, all of a sudden they become vocal.
Yeah.
The impact of you growing up Afrikaans, English, do you think, you said you were timid. Some of my favorite teachers have been Afrikaans people, in particular because they had to learn English as a second language. So I don't know if that had an impact in your upbringing. Do you love Afrikaans still? Do you love white people? Or have you kind of sold out from your Afrikaans heritage?
Some of my best friends are Afrikaans. I don't know, man. It's quite interesting. And it's so funny because, sometimes our family just diss us after sending us to Model C schools.
Sure.
And think that we think we are white. And
of
I'm
course.
like, you paid for us to go to these schools.
Nazo.
Now you want to be also dissing us for sounding white and for knowing both English grammatically, but also, here's a fancy phrase for you, the cultural grammar of whiteness. But you paid for us, you sacrificed for us to go and learn how to be white. So we reproduce these things, right, until the fallers tell us to rein ourselves back in. And so I love Afrikaans, but I've had to learn to be really comfortable professionally with my colored Afrikaans register. Because I don't speak Rian Kruiwagen Afrikaans, Riders van the Grens Afrikaans.
Okay.
I speak Afrikaans like soos kleringmense Afrikaans praat in Elder.
Jy praat nog steeds. Baie dankie.
Nie mooi standaard Afrikaans nie. I mean, our Afrikaans.
Sure.
What, colored people in Cape Town call Afrikaaps. It's not a term I like because we've got our own dialect as colored people elsewhere in the country.
True.
And so that's my Afrikaans, and that's what I speak at home. My family's not English. But I suppose the conundrum is that because I went to an English high school, English universities, and you must feel the same. I mean, it's all of us, unless you went to a mother tongue institution.
Which don't exist, but
which
yes.
don't exist, exactly. That if I speak Afrikaans, I can speak Afrikaans comfortably, but it will be a mixture of Afrikaans and English.
Sure.
I've only conducted one professional interview in Afrikaans with Gayton McKenzie, which was really cool. Both of us were speaking Afrikaans.
Hey.
But other than that, I prefer English for a very bad reason, but it's an accident of my education. That I feel like when I speak Afrikaans formally, like if you want to do a political analysis interview with me in Afrikaans,
Sure.
my IQ will go down by 20 points. Because I don't have the vocabulary.
Sure, you
to say
run
everything I
out.
wanna say.
The bundles run out.
Yeah, I can't critique whiteness in Afrikaans as effectively as I can in English because I just have more of a command of the English language.
Yes.
But that's because of the schools I was sent to.
Sure.
You got 3 books. I got 3 books. You've got over 10 books.
What, 13 books?
13 books.
Like whole song is I'm doing something.
Let's start with A Bantu In My Bathroom.
It was my first book, a collection of essays many years ago now, and it basically had 3 parts to it, and they were just ruminations. The first part was about sex and sexuality. The second part, sorry, I was going to say something there, but we can come back
Please
to
say it. I know you want to say it because I was going to ask about it. I know I was going to ask about it.
No, I was going to say he's got an aura of conservativeness about him. Maybe it's the sober thing. So if we want to talk about the sex part, we can do that.
Please.
The second part was about race. And then the third part was just a range of other topics. Cultural issues, dog issues, animal issues. But it was dominantly about sex and about race. And obviously the second book was just me asking myself, if you can't vote ANC, which I don't think anyone should vote for the ANC, can I take a chance on the DA? And I analyzed the DA. And then because race and racism doesn't go away,
Sure.
I decided my third book should be an exclusive examination of racism. And so I returned to the race topic, but I went into it in far more detail than I did in the first book. But also a collection of essays.
Colored people, I think, are similar in number to white people in this country. I think about 8% each. Are you one of the people that feel that colored people have been forgotten in this country? Do you think colored people themselves take themselves seriously? Is there hope for colored people to also fight for a stake in this nation for themselves as a colored person yourself?
I don't write and talk enough about colored politics, so your question is really cool. And I don't know why, I just find it emotionally difficult because it's so close to home. When I talk about colored people, I immediately talk about myself, my family, Grahamstown, where I grew up.
Sure.
And then you don't have the same kind of intellectual control as you do speaking about you guys and about you
Sure.
and about white people.
Sure.
And actually, I think there's a lot of space in South African public discourse to tackle your question. But I'll say one or two things. Firstly, I'm a little bit of an odd one out. I think amongst colored people, most of my family think of themselves as colored. I think
Sure.
of myself as black,
Okay.
not as colored.
Okay.
I'm culturally colored, but I'm a black South African.
Okay.
And I don't self-identify as colored.
Steve Harvey says, you may be colored in South Africa, but come to America, you are black.
So I see myself in that sense as black. But obviously, let's not be disingenuous. Because
Yeah.
of the Population Registration Act and apartheid spatial planning, colored people, as we have come to know that group and our particular ancestry, we have developed a sort of language and a sense of identity of our own,
Yes.
broadly construed. The colored people who are in my category, an older version of me, are the ones who typically got involved in multiracial anti-apartheid struggle,
Sure.
like the mass democratic movement, the UDF, joining the ANC and that kind of thing.
Sure.
But your average college person who didn't like white people, but who didn't participate in black political formations, which is a large number of colored people in my life, see
Sure.
themselves as colored. I don't. Those people see themselves as being forgotten in post-apartheid South Africa. And I think there's a case to be made.
Sure.
But quite frankly, the reason I really don't like that discussion too much is that white supremacy is the biggest problem in our country.
Sure.
And white people's disproportionate share of the wealth that they have is the biggest economic injustice. And when I see people who are all downtrodden fighting in an Olympics of suffering,
Yes.
it is sociologically interesting, but I think it's politically not useful. Because the real question we've got to ask ourselves is, why do only white people ever enjoy single-digit unemployment?
Sure.
I think maybe only in the last 2 years have they tasted what 10 or 11% is like.
Sure.
But most of our democracy, white people only, had single-digit unemployment. Black Africans haven't, coloreds haven't.
Sure.
And so the question of who has it worse or better, coloreds or poor or a black woman, domestic worker, we're all in the same boat. We are all losers of democracy.
Sure.
Where you have a black elite and a white minority controlling the economy.
Sure.
And so the question of the state of colored people and the fate of colored communities in this country is the same question as the fate of people who live in Khayelitsha.
Sure.
I wouldn't pose it as a distinct question. It's the same community.
Why do you think it's important for colored people to identify as black? Or do you think that's just you isolated and it's fine with them? Because colored in America, I think, is derogatory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why would you think it's important to identify as colored? As a colored person who's highly educated, well-traveled, who's a great thinker, where other colored people are struggling with drugs, alcohol abuse, gangs, and all these things. If they are to listen to you speak, why is it important, as Eusebius said, to actually stop identifying as colored? Because this is a white construct. They did it for us. Why should I identify as black?
I can't answer that question, and I can't impose my view on other colored people. Not because I'm a relativist in my thinking, and because I'm scared to tell people what to think.
Sure.
There are many questions on which I will tell you what I think is a wrong position and what is a more acceptable position.
Sure.
But with genuine political humility, I must say that there are many excellent colored academics, writers, thinkers, scholars, activists, politicians who are far more literate on the question of colored people's genealogy
Sure.
and colored politics than I am. And so some of them will come back and talk about the first persons, not using the word colored, a different one, but still a different one from black or white. And so there's genuine deep complexity, if you want to be intellectual about it, around the question of the origins of the colored community. How do we self-identify different colored communities in different parts of the country that have links to, say, Malaysia or to other parts of the globe?
Yes.
And so that complexity must be acknowledged. So for me to just say, I'm going to come on the Hustlers Corner and say all colored people must identify as black
Yes.
is actually to be ignorant
Sure.
about how much of a deep discussion there is that hasn't been lifted to the public surface.
Yes.
And if I'm worth my salt as a broadcaster, I should bring some of those colored poets, thinkers into my platform
Sure.
and allow them to show off to the country the complexity of the internal debate between colored academics. A lot of this happened at UCT, is happening at UWC. Many of them, like Adam Haupt, who are doing amazing work
Sure.
on this question. And that's why I wouldn't. For me, at a deeply personal level, just speaking as Eusebius, Nje,
Sure.
I just think, and it's a quick way to circumvent the complexity, that apartheid history was divide and rule. They benefited from us thinking of ourselves in lagers,
In silos.
right? Because when you think in silos, we're not cooperating against the beast, and the beast is white supremacy. And I just think that we should not lose sight of how some of our sense of being a homogenous community was actually one that was constructed by the apartheid architects.
Sure.
And they are the biggest winners when we continue to perpetuate those differences.
Of course. I want to ask one more question before you speak to us about sex.
Yes.
You spoke about English. I love the English language, by the way. So
can
I
tell.
was well colonized. They did well, the British. You've assimilated to English as a language of choice. You believe your vocabulary is deeper. You can explain things. You can debate, etc. You assimilated. Now you're saying you're black. Why would you not assimilate to whiteness? Because seemingly it's the progressive thing. They the winners. They in the economy. They etc. etc. Why would you choose? I love English. Maybe I even love the way they dress. I love their tea. I love all the things they came with. But I want to identify with black, the people who actually lost.
Isn't he what Zuma would call like a clever black? Clever black.
You
702.
are also-
702 black, this one.
too.
702 black. I'm not a 702 black.
What's gosh? She's a 702 black.
You
Jeez.
said you studied BCom. Now you're asking me BA questions.
Oh, it's because I went to Rhodes. That's my
No, it's a
excuse.
it's a
Everyone
beautiful-
at Rhodes is there for journalism and drama,
Yeah,
and
that's true.
us
That's
weirdos there for law
journalism.
and accounting. It's like, why are you here?
Drinking.
Yo, and the drinking.
And I mean, it's a beautiful question, but let me answer it this way. The simplest way I'll answer it is when we oppose and reject and fight against white supremacy and whiteness,
Sure.
there are very specific aspects of the colonial mindset and colonial tropes that we are fighting against. Like the idea that white people are intrinsically smarter than us, superior
Sure.
to us. That if we want to debate even the black experience, we must ask Helen Ziller what we should feel as black people about being black.
Sure.
We outsource the final word to a black person. Black people are the ultimate exemplars of what it means to be beautiful, to be convincing. That the idea of what it means to be a strong leader is go and look at what 10 white CEOs are role modeling, and then you'll find the answer.
Sure.
So when we reject whiteness, we are rejecting that entire history of white people setting the standard for everything from beauty to leadership excellence to decency to etiquette. I mean, so much so, this morning, I won't mention his name, I was speaking to a government spokesperson that I really love, and him and I were talking about the Senzo Mayua trial and how the advocate, is quite township on the one side, and you've got the one black advocate who is just ungovernable in his etiquette, and you've got a black judge who says to him, advocate, I'm not on your case, but please make sure that when you put on, I might get the terminology wrong, when you put on the regalia, that you do it in the proper way. And I'm thinking to
The
myself,
Pura.
yeah,
Wow.
but what's going on there is that
Yeah.
we've imported the etiquette in terms of court etiquette from
Yes.
England, and it's the norm here. And here you have two very smart black people
Yes.
struggling in the Queen's English
Yes.
to police each other using the Queen's etiquette.
100%.
So that's the kind of nonsense we should
Go
reject.
cut your dreads off.
Yes.
This is not professional.
What used to piss me off
So
is
that's-
all those legal people used to wear that
Exactly.
wig in court.
Yes.
And
you know?
even when they leave the court, it's like doing that kind of nonsense.
Clownish.
So that's what I'm rejecting. But where I would disagree with people who want to wholesale say no to anything from the West
Sure.
is that I'm not about to apologize for loving Chopin. I'm not going to apologize that I did classical music at Graham College and got good marks for it, and I loved impressionistic era music. I'm fluent in that stuff.
Sure.
I love J.M. Coetzee's literature. I don't care if you want to go and cancel me because I say that Disgrace by Coetzee is a brilliantly written text just because he's a white man who's gone to Australia. And so I think there's something very foolish about thinking that you must uncritically get rid of every single thing that originates from a white brain or hand,
Sure.
or mouth.
It's also hypocritical.
Yeah,
Yeah. We love
No.
our cell phones and our...
absolutely.
When imiti namakamba are not working for you, you rush to a hospital and you want that Western medication. So
We pick
a lot
and
of
choose
it,
anyway, yeah.
but it's cognitive dissonance, according
Yeah.
to Frans Fanon.
Yeah, but the important thing is that we are aware that there is a broader history of whiteness.
Yeah.
And that is what we fight against. If you go to the average private school and go and audit their libraries, you're going to find a disproportionate number of white authors compared to black authors in a country where 90% of the population is black.
Sure.
That is problematic.
That's a challenge to everyone that we need more black authors. More people need to write books. Can be a 10-page book, it's fine. J.M. Coetzee, Disgrace, I think he features Grahamstown in that book.
It does actually,
Amazing
yeah.
book, sorry.
And the SPCA.
That was my last question before we discuss sex and before Spuda takes over.
Nota, when Nota was here, he says when he was in the suburbs, studying in the suburbs, going to school in the suburbs, he was one of the top students
Sure.
for a couple of years, for a lot of years.
And he was the only black student, I think he said.
Yeah, something like that.
Sure.
And then he went back to the township and he was like, yo, these blacks are more smarter than I am. and they actually kind of feel he's from white schools and they're probably better over
Sure.
there. And he's like, no, I'm from there. I was the smartest over there.
Yes.
And I'm
Exactly.
here. I'm not even one of the top 10 smart guys
Yeah.
at school. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Quite an interesting debate. Now, let's talk about radio and broadcasting, which is when I got, I started getting familiar with your career. I don't think at some point when when you're growing up the times at which we did, you kind of feel, I want to be on radio as the type of minds that you guys are. But I think you kind of feel, I want to be on radio, the type of, upbringing that I had, minds that I had.
Are
I'm
you
an
excluding
entertainer,
yourself? Stop it.
I'm a DJ.
I don't know what you're doing, but what you're doing is
I'm
pop.
a DJ. It's not pop. but nangisakhula ekhasi, ingqondo
No, I
yami
hear
ithi-
you. I hear you.
But I don't think when anawusakhula you think what you do well as a broadcaster, maybe it's not a career that is looked at as cool because you kind of feel maybe it's for older people who are more smarter, who are more educated. But when did it strike to say, you know what, I can actually do well on radio? Let's talk about your broadcasting career on radio.
The start of my radio career was a little bit shallow, mixed with some not so shallow sort of motivations. I knew that I will get bored inside a maths model, and so I was trying to be a management consultant. It didn't work. I got bored, really, really bored, working at one that I normally wouldn't mention because it was cool. But now that they've been implicated in state capture, I won't mention them.
Oh, I know
because It's
them.
no longer cool to mention them. And then I just decided, what actually am I excited about? And I thought I like having an audience. I like talking and debating. The most fun extramural activity I had in high school and university was debating. It just turned me on. And so talk radio to me just made complete sense. So when I approached 702, the station manager and the program manager, it was because I thought it would actually really be nice to do what these guys do on radio. And of course I was being arrogant because some talk radio hosts, in my mind, were not doing as good a job as I thought can be done to ask really analytical questions, to really hold power accountable, and not to be scared of politicians in particular. And when I hear them on radio, I thought but if this guy can be there, then why can't I be? So I really enjoyed, once I got on behind the mic, suddenly having to shift as a seasoned debater, appreciating that communicating on radio is different to being a high school debater.
Sure.
Storytelling is more important than it is in debating. In debating, it's all about data and facts.
Yes.
Now you're like, so what happened, Sabu? How do you feel? Teasing the story out, nodding like you're nodding now, and hoping I can move you a little bit. So the medium, I just fell in love with learning how to entertain people and how to be compelling. Being clever or thinking that you are clever is secondary. And I think the mistake currently, if I can be spicy and subtweet, is that sometimes smart people are given positions these days in radio or TV, but they actually don't have our talk radio equivalent of what you guys call in music, mic technique. And if you're not compelling and entertaining, you don't understand how to use angles, body language, facial expressions, light and shade, you're not going to be a good broadcaster. So the other thing I've enjoyed about talk radio is that my first fear was people mustn't think I'm dumb. They mustn't think that I'm only on radio because I couldn't get another job.
Yeah.
I must prove to them that I've got a master's degree in philosophy.
Yeah.
By the time I left radio, I didn't actually
must
care
prove that
about
I'm smart.
No, because actually being smart is helpful, but being smart is neither necessary nor enough to be good in broadcasting. Some of my favorite broadcasters are not necessarily people who are going to be academics or could have been academics. And then there are many friends of mine that are academically important to my intellectual growth that I'll call on the phone saying, hey man, I'm doing a show on state capture. Can we just talk about state capture? But I don't want them on my radio show because they're going to make my audience fall asleep. But I know how to make the insights of our conversation travel on radio. So radio for me is very special. But that specialness developed as I became used to the medium. It wasn't my initial reasons for getting into the industry.
I get you. The culture at 702 versus the culture at Power FM, without having to be specific about the radio stations, but talking about you, the experiences that you've had on both platforms.
Power FM, when it was conceived, was brilliant because it was a black-owned space for black people, by black people. And, I used to be, I suppose, Given could contradict me, but I think it's fair to say that we loved each other and I was like the head prefect of Given.
Yeah.
And we would sit and I would flip between officially only being an employee and being a co-creator with Given and Andile, thinking through what is the brand of the station, what are we trying to achieve? And I'm going to give away industry secrets, but I think it's okay now. We used to think of ourselves as competing in format with 702. And print media journalists got it wrong. Like after the first week on air, they did a sort of breakfast versus breakfast, mid-morning versus mid-morning comparison of the two stations. And secretly, we were laughing because we weren't competing with 702. We were competing with Kaya FM. Because the idea was, yes, we talk and Kaya is music. But we want secretly the Kaya numbers and black professionals who are aspiring to develop wealth and to be confident in their skin as middle-class black people to go, actually, Kaya entertains me, but they think that all I want is to go to a jazz event or on a pleasure cruise on a boat with a small little bit of conversation sometime in the evening. A little bit. But for the most part, it's Kaya FM is an extension of TV adverts where black people are constantly dancing and singing. And at Power FM, we thought our secret hidden agenda is to get the large numbers of listeners from Kaya to migrate to us. They'll get the dancing over the weekend with our incredible lineup over the weekend of incredible DJs we had. And during the week, we make them feel at home. Whereas 702 is like being the first black head prefect at a white school. You're never quite at home.
Sure.
And that for me was the sort of DNA of Power. And if Given is watching this, you will know this is why I went to Cape Town and Durban with him.
He is.
Because
Shout out to Grootman.
how's it Given?
Sure.
Because that was what we took to trade and how we explained the differentiator of Power. Now, what I won't go into, because I think it's a family conversation and a conversation between ex-family members, is why that project didn't reach a crescendo. I think Power didn't quite realize its potential.
Do you think it still does?
I think it can. I don't think it does.
I think it does.
Okay.
The evolving of the industry. I remember when myself, Touch, and Gareth were getting into the space, it was early days. It was the beginning. I think all three of us and our partners and whoever got into the space burnt a lot of money, but I think it was necessary for the industry. I believe pioneers start things for other people to come in and make things better, right? And we're seeing this internet space evolve, and we're seeing broadcasters who are coming from an old school era of broadcasting migrate and evolve in the space, and some doing well. And big up to everybody that watches us. Our podcast seems to be growing in numbers as well. I would like to hear your take and your opinions in comparing the mainstream platforms that you are a part of. Now you are podcasting just like us.
The most important awesomeness about podcasting and a platform like yours is that there's no editorial gatekeeping. And that's fantastic. We don't need to persuade some CFO to give us a chance to talk about race, to talk about sex, to talk about the media, to talk about South African political discourse. We can simply get on with it. And mainstream media are now jealous. They're going to click on your episode and go, shit, here's an episode like 150,000 views. We've got so much money and 20, 30-year institutional memory behind us and an entire organogram of 500 employees. But when we archive this morning's conversation that happened at 7 o'clock, it doesn't get downloaded by more than 300 people. And so the barriers to entry are low. And if you understand intuitively or based on both intuition and industry experience, marketing and audience, then you can create magic. And I love it. I absolutely love it. I have declined opportunities after leaving 702 to go back on some mainstream platforms because, like you, I'm a maverick.
Shout out to Spuda.
Producers want to get me on as a commentator on, we've got so many issues. I say no 9 times out of 10. But here I am, and I wouldn't even think twice about saying yes to you. When you asked me, I typed yes before you even finished asking. Right? And it's deliberate, not only because I respect your work and your guys' platform, but also because I actually think that mainstream media must go back to the drawing board and go and bite their nails thinking, shit, that conversation these 3 guys are having is chalking up talkability more than my primetime host that I'm paying 150,000 Rand a month to.
Jeez. I've got questions with Buddha. Sorry.
Before I... Okay, go ahead.
Now, I wanted to add on top of this because I was going to ask if you think radio and podcasts are mutually exclusive. And then a second question, because you guys have been in the industry, if you'd recommend if you recommend podcasters maybe spend some time in radio, or radio people spend some time with podcasters, I don't know, to look for synergy.
That's a beautiful question. I want Subu's answer as well, but I'll give you my quick ones. He's got more experience. But firstly, one of the things, because I entered radio with my own quirkiness as a person, I never stick to rule books. And I try things, and I've got nervous energy, and I can multitask.
Sure.
It's never either or. There were some people who didn't know my voice on 702, but who knew the content, because I would tweet live while I'm interviewing you. And I would tweet what you are saying as the minister, as a businessman.
I remember that.
I would do that. So some people can literally in real time see the essence of the conversation on Twitter. Because I knew that people are on Twitter.
Sure.
So you can't say to people, please, pretty please, with the cherry on top,
Sure.
don't watch Twitter and come listen on radio.
Sure.
You've
Sure.
got to go to where the customer is. If the
Yes.
customer wants to hang out on Spaces, you can't be like, oh no, Spaces is not for me.
100%.
Like a real artiste must be like on radio behind the mic. No, you're an idiot. Because if the market says we want paint and you say, no, I'm making toffee apple, now's not the time.
Sure.
So do both. And
Okay.
so for the traditionalist who doesn't want to buy a smartphone, who doesn't want to load Twitter, continue to appreciate being on radio. Sure. And so if I was on radio still, or had to go back tomorrow, I will continue podcasting. Sure. Because there's a unique value proposition for podcasting, and it's beautiful.
Sure.
And similarly, if I was on radio, the way I would use Twitter Spaces is I would say to my listeners, it's 5 minutes before 12, guys. It's almost time for the midday report with Stephen Grootes. But I can see some of you still want to talk about sex with me and Dr. Eve. We're going to have a Twitter Spaces at 1 o'clock. I just need a bite to eat, but I'll find you on Twitter Spaces. Those of you who still want to continue the conversation, check it out there.
Solid.
So the conversation continues, right? And there's connectivity that talk radio has that podcast doesn't have.
Okay.
People can't call in right now. They've had
Sure.
many moments while watching us going like, I disagree, Eusebius. Like, I want to say this. Ask him this question, and they can't interact with us.
Sure.
That is what radio has over us with podcasting. But the thing about podcasting is, number one, there's no time limit. Number two, you can think before you speak.
Yeah.
You don't have to speak to fill the air, which means that the quality of the conversation can be better. You can curate it, you can edit it, and you've got greater freedom. We can swear. We're not beholden to the PCCSA. We can do all sorts of things yet.
Sure.
And so those are the beautiful things about podcasting, and I kind of like that. So for me, it's not either or.
Okay.
To your last question, would a new podcaster benefit from doing radio? Yes, I can't tell you. I'm a bit of a snob. I don't know if you are. How many people think that just because they can be a podcaster, they should be, even though they don't have mic technique?
Sure.
They don't understand the importance of being compelling, storytelling. Some of the fundamentals of good radio can help a podcaster to be better as a podcaster.
Sure.
But that said, unfortunately, some of our program managers and station managers have become so disinterested in taking their job seriously that they've also started hiring people with similar weaknesses on radio. So we can't exactly pretend that every single radio presenter is the gold standard of how to communicate.
Sure.
There's a new broadcast law that is just a new broadcast bill that has just been signed into law. I haven't read up on it. We
Sure.
spoke about it the other day.
Sure.
I don't know if you are familiar. And how is it going to impact the internet? You're not aware of it?
No, I haven't checked out the
Oh,
details
okay.
of it. I know the conversation is ongoing, but I haven't checked it out.
Okay, maybe we'll revisit the
But I
conversation.
want to know what you think about the podcasting space versus radio and that kind of
I think it's a beautiful space. I really do believe barrier to entry in terms of beginning careers has been decentralized. I think the internet has decentralized broadcasting. And I think that's why you have bigger people even watching these platforms, or you even have radio stations getting talent from these platforms. Sure. I mean, it started with the influencers or the actors or, the television industry, whether it grab presenters or maybe because of however many followers they have, because there's something they're doing on social media that's working. So which means now mainstream media is following what's going on the internet, which is what's going on, us evolving to be where we are. I really do think there's a lot of things that guys that are on radio are learning from podcasters and people that are at an advantage. I was saying to him the other day, like us, who broadcasted from back in the day before internet and who evolved into when internet was starting, as you were saying, where now, how do I mix this internet thing with my being on air? All the way into being fully 100% on the internet. I think we bring in a lot of experience that works to our advantage. And what technology has done, it has made everything else easy. I was saying to him, I love the fact that I can just go to my YouTube studio and I can just go into the dashboard and look at the analytics and see what episode is working, what is not working, and look at it, the audiences per video. Look at the demographics, where they are, and what's working and what's not working immediately right now without having to wait for the ratings to come out in a couple of months' time.
Based on inaccurate methodology, you're a business person. The other advantage of the analytics of our media that we are now experimenting with is that you can directly go and tell a potential advertiser or partner, here's who I'm speaking with, here's how many people are watching me, here's where in the world they're listening from, which devices they're coming from. Whereas if SAFM tells you, oh yeah, we've grown 50% year on year, we know that those ABS what like figures are based on like calling 3 people every other year. They change their methodology. We actually don't know with precision how many people listen to a radio station.
Actually, we're not sure.
We don't.
Yeah.
And so that's another advantage
sure.
we have in this space, is that we can have a more data-driven, evidence-driven conversation from a commercial point of view.
And now I want to talk about your podcast. The inspiration to start the podcast, what is it about? What do you aim to achieve?
I was never into podcasting until a good friend of mine, who was actually my boss at Power FM, persuaded me that I should start a podcast. And after I started podcasting, I suddenly realized, oh my God, this is like learning to read and then entering the library building and then discovering there are so many worlds behind this door. Because the hundreds of podcasts that exist locally and internationally, I didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
And I still think it's still an embryonic stage of the industry.
Yeah.
Because every second person, like an Uber driver, will say to me, where are you now? And I'm like, oh my God. Like, talk radio is not the only way to access content. I appreciate the love that's implicit in your question. But then I realized that even though there's a intense following amongst podcast listeners who are into podcasting, that as a share of audio journalism, it's still very small.
Yeah.
But I realized that it's a big deal for those who are into it. And the inspiration was very simple, is that I realized that I shouldn't be complacent about where I fit into the South African space. You know, some people like yourself are very good at remaining relevant over your entire career. Some people fall off very quickly. Some come and go, reinvent themselves, like Fat Joe, who's done a great job at doing that. But you should never take for granted that you are entitled to be popular, to be heard, to be interesting, to have people like consume your content. And so the worst thing you can do is to go, when I'm ready, I'll come back whenever and wherever I want to. And so I started the podcast platform just to make sure that I tick over my engagement with the South African audience, even if it's a smaller share than those who would listen to me on 702 or at Power FM. So that was the motivation. But once I started, I suddenly just got excited by the possibility. Now I've just done my 100th episode.
Hey,
I'm at over
congratulations.
Like downloads.
We're only on episode 13, episode 14.
Yeah, somewhere there. Jeez.
And it takes discipline because it's obviously very hard. And
Consistency.
You need a team behind you and that kind of thing. But there's that. The important thing was to keep being relevant, because you can't just think that the market is going to be ready to receive you once you're back to start again. I think that would be an arrogant assumption.
Because people are moving on, they're living
People
their
move
lives,
on,
man,
and also there's so much talent. You think that you are still relevant, and then meanwhile,
Penuel
has taken over your
You know what I
platform.
mean?
You know, they don't care what you think. They're going to his book launch, not yours.
Jeez. I've got a question for you, Sbu, actually, that's leading on from the one I asked Eusebius. Radio versus podcasting versus online radio. Do you think online radio is still going to be a thing? Because you and I have spoken about data and the cost of, and our lack of connectivity being an issue, which would be some of the things that will allow you to become your own Power FM. Because obviously SAPCs and all, you just switch on and the radio's there. But here you need data and you're listening for 2-3 hours.
Yeah.
You're like, no, Baba, ngeke ngilunge. So I'm just asking, do you think there's a future for online radio, or is the transition just going to be podcasting and maybe going back to normal traditional radio? Is there space for online radio?
That's a very, very good question. You know, I believe, or some of the work that we've done with, use my own experiences with Massive Metro. Some of the episodes that we've done, some of the awesome marketing content that we've created over the years. We've spent a lot of money on it.
Sure.
An entire building, a team, a sales team, a marketing team, different slots and all of that. And that's why I was saying myself, Gareth and Thibaut Touch, would have chats, and I'm aware of how much money each of us burned.
Sure.
And also because we care about also younger talent. We brought in a lot of people, etc.
Sure.
There's a lot of things that I believe right now we are achieving with the Hustlers Corner.
Sure.
More than what I was achieving with my own radio show that was under the platform Massive Metro. Although that was a collective that one was building, but it was also costly.
Sure.
And it was dependent on advertisers, right? And even the money that you are using at the time that you're burning, you're being borrowed. So
Sure.
it's an expensive exercise.
Sure.
But that's why I say sometimes mavericks or pioneers will start things in the beginning for other people to come on and make them better.
Sure.
I'm understanding only now that actually there is a cheaper way on achieving what we thought we would achieve then.
Yes.
Myself and Touch and Gareth and a whole lot of others. And by the way, shout outs to Sisbu Usi, who was at YFM back in the day, but who was one of the first people, if not the first in South Africa, to start an online radio station called Trans Africa.
Jeez.
You know, Sisbu Usi is actually down the road. Her company is called Trans Africa.
Sure.
Trans Africa has been online forever,
Sure.
since back in the day. But it's a costly exercise.
Yeah.
But here, it's just the team behind the scenes. It's us focusing on this podcast. And apart from other revenue streams on how we can exploit this podcast,
Sure.
or monetize it,
Sure.
YouTube on it has created a beautiful back end of
Yes.
consolidating that entire team that runs a radio station
Sure.
into my phone.
Sure.
Where there's no one who's late, there's no one who has not sent the invoice, there's no one who has not responded to an email.
Sure.
It's already done for me.
Yeah.
All I have to do is just to focus on the quality of the production,
Sure.
and make sure that it's uploaded at a certain time. So things are getting better and better and easier
Sure.
to still achieve the same goals that you did then, better and easier right now. You know what I mean?
You think we're going to
That's
have
my
online radio stations in the future?
There always will be, because
Sure.
I believe they will not necessarily be called radio stations in a sense of them being radio, like how we've always known radio.
Sure.
But I believe there will be like podcast networks.
Do you think traditional radio is going to graduate to online? and switch off from.
It already
when
has.
everyone goes onto the internet.
It already has, because you can never change the manner or the behavioral patterns of how ordinary people live their lives.
Sure.
People are still going to get into a taxi, get into a bus, they're still going to put on their headphones with their phone in their hand. They're still going to get into the car and drive.
Sure.
Some of them, as they're growing up, they still won't have any choices to make those decisions
Sure.
because they're next to their parents
Yeah.
who are consistently making those decisions daily.
Sure.
And because they're growing up under that household or next to this parent, automatically they become like that as they grow as well. So radio will never die. Radio will evolve.
Okay.
We've seen a lot of radio stations who've done that really well. There's others who are still trying to catch up. But I mean, if you look at the online presence of Kai FM, for instance, they're doing a great job.
Sure.
So I don't believe radio is going to die. I just believe it'll keep evolving.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's my answer.
No, thank you.
Okay, let me give it to you. Let's continue.
I want to speak
But we
about...
can speak to Eusebius the whole day.
Sure. I want to speak about sex and sexuality. Please. Please.
You're saying please? What are you asking for? Ufunanto.
Don't ask. He's been wanting to speak about sex.
It's not after 9 yet.
Yeah, it's not after 9, but we have to discuss. It's a very sensitive topic. I want us to slightly unpack that.
Okay, let me say a
because
couple
I
of
think
things,
next to
right?
race, it's also very...
I'm the one who sort of like headlined it with when I was saying what my first book touched on. So sex and sexuality are interesting political topics.
Sure.
Everything is political in some sense, right? So the kinds of questions that certainly I found interesting and that I dealt with is that obviously, firstly, as a queer man, I have an interest in questions such as discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation.
Sure.
But then there are other questions that are adjacent to that one that are also interesting. So the kinds of issues that I engaged in a Bantu In My Bathroom are questions such as what should be our attitude towards men who are in the closet? Like, I've dated men who are in the closet. I've been a married man side hustle when I was a student.
You're what?
I was a side... I don't want to use the gendered version.
You're a
What is a
side
male-
piece for a married man.
Yes.
Who was married to a woman.
Yeah, he was married to a woman.
Just to be clear, you're not straight.
No, I'm extremely gay.
What are you laughing at?
No, the way you said
No,
it.
he's saying it.
No, I mean in the sense that I've never had sex with a woman. I can't.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm
So
curious.
you can't compare, ne?
No, and I'm a very experimental person. I'm sexually open to different kinds of experiences. I love being experimental in terms of sex, and I would be open to the idea of, having sex with a woman, but I've got no sexual attraction towards women at all.
Sure.
No, I don't. But he was, the guy that I was dating was bisexual.
Sure.
I think he was bisexual. Yeah.
When did you realize that you're not attracted to women? Because obviously, high school, varsity, all the gents are getting chicks. What's happening to you?
Something has just occurred to me, Penuel, and I've never thought about it before. That I've never thought about when I had a moment of realizing that I'm attracted to girls.
Sure.
I've never thought about it in that sense.
You just found yourself attracted to men?
Yes, my earliest memory of rejecting a girl is when a friend of my mom's was visiting us when I was a kid. I must have been 6 or 7 years old. And she wanted to play house. And I
Jeez.
pretended to be asleep.
Black man party.
And my earliest memory of having a crush in retrospect, because I didn't know it at the time, was going back to primary school. I can think of all the boys in my class that I used to find attractive. Sometimes when I'm bored, I'll go on Facebook to see what they look now in their 30s and 40s. I'm like, it didn't turn out that well. This one still has become a really cool adult man.
Sure.
So my earliest recollections of same-sex attraction go back to junior and high school. But because I was such a sort of teacher's pet, just in looking after myself as a student and not going out, not socializing, not drinking, I was an asexual teenager.
Sure.
But once I came out at Rhodes,
Yes, because that's the best place for people to come out.
it's the best place to come out.
A lot of
Yeah.
guys that I know personally,
Yeah.
good friends of mine, came out at Rhodes.
Yeah, in fact, it's boring to be straight.
The platform is very ripe there.
It's probably it is. It's probably hard to be straight at Rhodes
And sober.
and sober, right? But once I came out, then you suddenly have recollections of moments that were queer moments that you didn't have the language for, or maybe you didn't have the wherewithal, or didn't want to go there unconsciously. Because I suddenly realized, oh my God, I actually found so-and-so attractive in high school.
Sure.
This one was really cool. This guy was in the first team rugby. How's it, Tommy? Was actually really attractive.
Sure.
And I checked you out on Facebook. You're still looking cool.
Jeez, Tommy's a real person.
He's a real person, yeah.
How did you handle being hit on by... I mean, you're a good-looking guy. How did you handle being hit on by girls?
I don't think they hit on me because I didn't realize that you're supposed to struggle to come out. And so because I came out when I was in second year, so I would have been 18 or 19, I don't know what it's like to present as straight.
But you sound like a late bloomer. If you're saying you came out in second year, people start dating when they're 14.
Only now, though. I'm jealous of the current generation.
When did you start dating?
I only started dating, like, through university. I
Yeah,
didn't
so
date
you're a
in high
late
school.
bloomer.
Yeah. I didn't even date girls when I was in high school. I didn't date anyone.
Sure.
I dated chess, cross-country running, classical music, and books.
Sure.
Those were the things that I dated. So, as a person with a little bit of a public sort of following, people only know me as gay. And so, I can't imagine. I don't know. I mean, women don't hit on me.
Okay.
Because I'm just so overt about being gay.
Have you ever been curious with the sisters and think maybe one day you would like to be, explore?
Especially having kids.
I don't want to have children. I've had a almost threesome involving a woman, but my
Eusebius.
disinterest. Yeah, I mean, this is now becoming a McG podcast.
No, but when people are young, explore, bro,
Yeah,
He said earlier that
almost,
he's
it was
curious
almost.
even now. He's experimental, is the term he used.
in terms of sexuality, I mean,
Yes.
there's a lot of things one can mean by that. I mean, you can
Sure.
be queer and conservative sexually.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's actually possible in terms of the kinds of things that you want to do.
Sure.
Not every gay person necessarily would want to be involved in, let's say, a threesome.
Sure.
So we sometimes think of all gay people as being sexually wild or
Sure.
interesting or, being into all sorts of things. That's not the case. There's also such thing as being vanilla and gay in your sexual preferences.
Jeez.
So no, I've never been into them. But anyway, the kinds of issues for me that are interesting are questions like, should we judge people who are on the down low? Should we judge people who are in the closet? Is there something unethical about being a married man who is straight or not straight, who's bisexual,
Sure.
and you're having an affair with
Sure.
another guy? What should our attitude be, both towards me, by the way, but also what should be our attitude towards the married guy that I dated? And my views have evolved. In my first book, I criticized men on the down low.
Sure.
And I know many men on the down low. I won't out you guys, don't worry.
We'll out you in
prominent,
time. No, I'm
interesting
joking.
South Africans who are on the down low.
I've heard. I've
Yes.
heard. A lot of prominent South Africans are on the
Why?
down.
Have you been someone's Benton?
Unfortunately not. Maybe they're not attracted to me. I don't know.
You know
I've
you're
never
very
had offers.
attractive. Yeah,
Maybe I'll get an offer from you after
What? He
this.
knows what?
he's an attractive guy.
Oh,
I'm
is
sure
he?
he's had
Oh,
offers.
Thank you. I've never been offered, but I've met a lot of people. I've met a lot of, some of these prominent men will say, these are some of my mates, and yes, because we've had stories like the hockey club and
Yeah, Jackie
whatever.
Pamudze has spoken about
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. There's lots of stories I can tell you off air. So here's one example of a question. Because remember, for me, as an author, I'm not interested in gossip. I'm
Sure.
interested in raising critical questions.
Sure.
And I'm also interested in how our views evolve over time. My earlier, younger self thought there's something obvious about living a life on the down low.
Sure.
Now I'm in a position where I think it's possibly unethical, but I've got less judgment and greater openness to understanding the context that lead to those choices being made.
Sure.
If you come from a deeply homophobic society, like the guy that I dated, who came from a Muslim family
Yo.
and a deeply conservative family
Yo.
from a very conservative country. Not
Sure.
to say all Muslim families are conservative, but his particular context. I once put it to him and I said, by the way, what would happen if you and I were dating openly? And he was very clear to me, and I think he meant it literally, that I would be murdered as a matter of an honor killing in my family.
Sure.
So now the question becomes, what should be our attitude towards a man who faces that choice? He's got same-sex desire. He can't live openly.
Sure.
Should we judge him? Or should we say, in the language of Facebook, it's complicated?
Sure. I want to say this. I used to be homophobic until I got to Rhodes. You get to Rhodes and you meet a lot of Barker Haynes type characters, where very alpha male,
Yes.
and he's just like, no, this is my boyfriend. You're like, no, it can't be. So my ignorance with homosexuality and the other varying ways was tested then. And at that time, obviously, Spuda's like, no, I like men. And now I have to figure out, do I still want to be friends with this guy?
Who said that? He said that.
No, I'm making it.
So he's just making an example.
Yeah. That's going to be a powerful moment.
Jeez.
On not radio. The not radio
Jeez.
powerful moment.
No, hey, I must use other people's examples. People might just snapshot and then...
Okay, let's use
I don't mind.
Let's take
No, it's not about you.
No,
it's
man,
just
make up a
we
name.
know how
Make
tabloids
up a
work.
name like
Yeah.
Sif and Kez.
Usif
He's a
wouldn't
good friend
mind.
of mine. He
Jeez.
won't
Shout out to Mr. Ngesi.
So I found myself figuring that out. And then over time, because this was the same journey I went through with religion, when I had to question religion, I became an atheist. Like you, I also got angry initially. Like, no, religion is... And I judged Christians. And over time, my thoughts have changed. I made a very controversial video 2 years ago, if not a year ago. And I expected a lot of my gay mates were going to understand. A lot of people took offense, and it wasn't even gay people. Because I was speaking of this idea that there's a perfect human that has been created in our minds. And when you deviate from what they call perfect, there's something wrong with you. And there's almost always a label. You know, if your pigmentation is somewhat, you're called an albino, you suffer with albinism. If you're born short, you're a midget or you're a dwarf, whatever. And I was trying to understand because one of my friends who is gay, I think he's actually bisexual, spoke about this concept that someone has written that almost all of us start off I guess, attracted to the same sex, or when we become curious, and then we're meant to graduate with puberty into being attracted to the other gender. And it's like some of these gay people get stuck psychologically in that space, and that's why a lot of them become flamboyant, because they're still childlike. That's why they become rich. That's why they're cool to hang around. And I've had to think about this idea, and at some point I even wondered if the idea of being homosexual, or whatever it is under the banner of LGBTQI, if we diagnosed it as being different, like being an albino, would deeply homophobic people be more understanding? And say, oh, Shay, my child suffers from gayness. You know, he's a bit different. He has that thing. It's a medical condition. So that we're more, because as long as we're like, it's not a medical condition, it's me, then people get angry. And then they want to do things like killings, for example. And the Muslim nation in general is conservative. And a lot of them, they write you off in the community if you're gay, or even if you date outside of either the church or even a particular race, you know. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts in particular about how do we conscientize, because we're a very homophobic nation. I don't care what our politicians say. A lot of them are also very homophobic, but they say the right things on platforms.
As a society, we have, for good reason, determined that below a certain age, you are incapable, because of your development of where you are at psychosocially and psychosexually, you are incapable of giving consent.
Sure.
And that's what's wrong with pedophilia. It's harmful, and it involves one person using another human's body without their permission, and that is a human that is incapable of giving permission.
Sure.
If I'm a 30-year-old and you're a 30-year-old, that does not come into play. And so the analogy...
It shouldn't come into play.
The analogy between pedophilia and same-sex sexual transactions doesn't make sense. It's completely disanalogous.
Sure.
For the nerdish viewer of the show, the only little thing that's kind of interesting about what Penuel is saying is that, of course, there is an arbitrariness around consenting age. In places like Hungary, the age of consent is very low, around 14. The last time I checked, in South Africa it's 16. In other countries it will be slightly higher. And then the question would be, why am I a criminal in Hungary, but I'm not a... Sure. Why am I a criminal in South Africa but not in Hungary? It seems to be quite arbitrary.
Sure.
But I think as a general principle, we agree children can't consent. And so when people say, where do you draw the line? All they're showing to me is that they've got very poor reasoning capacity. Consensual sexual transaction is not analogous to pedophilia.
No. So
you're not saying
the
that.
pedophilia
But
was
that's the
just
kind of
an
thing that comes up,
example.
you know?
I don't want to go too deep on this topic, but I'm just thinking when you speak about consent, where I've got money and this girl doesn't, so then she agrees to have sex with me because of the power I have. Using age as a measure, which we've realized my 8-year-old grandmother gets to vote. A 16-year-old child who's a genius can't vote, type of situation, but it becomes a much deeper thing. Are you saying we shouldn't have a line? It's complex, because I mentioned transgender as well. should we just take things as they come, as human beings? Because you've for example, drawn a line with pedophilia.
This is a clarificatory question.
Sure.
Right? I mean, the only reason I answered you on pedophilia is because pedophilia mustn't be in our conversation. We all agree pedophilia is wrong. It's not in this conversation.
Sure.
But with the trans question, I think you were going to ask a useful question that even some gay people secretly or not so secretly want to ask about the trans community.
Sure. A lot of them are transphobic. A lot
Yes.
of homosexuals are very transphobic. Yeah.
So when you say where do you draw the line, what are you getting at in relation to the trans question?
No, I was saying so.
And even the trans question is a
Sure.
weird phrase I don't like because
Sure. No,
trans people
Sure.
have full humanity like we do.
Speaking about our society, which is homophobic, speaking for myself, who used to be homophobic, these are conversations that we need to have. If we don't have them, the problem is that other people have them on our behalf, and then we won't have a choice.
Yeah.
Then age of consent will go down to 12 or whatever without our choice, because we refused to engage on platforms such as these, which are uncensored, which are not BCCSA, where we're not going to be dragged or cancelled, so to speak. So I was just asking, in your opinion, because you're part of a specific community that homophobes see. So they just want to know, okay, you want me to kind of understand you as a human being and seeing you. As a homophobic person, as an example, someone out there, okay, I accept you're gay, it's fine. But where must we draw the line? Because at some point, the blacks wanted the whites to see them as human. Then the women wanted the men to see them as human. Then people that had alternative sexualities wanted to be seen as human. Where do we stop? Someone wants to, obviously we said pedophilia is bad. Someone wants to sleep with their dog. And so where do we draw the line as the ignorant people out there who are like, well, I was heavily conservative. I'm trying to be open-minded. How far must I open my mind?
Can I answer you in a roundabout way with a nice little anecdote, which is one of my favorite stories that I will have to stop retelling because I've retold it so many times. One of my favorite current thinkers in the world on race is Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Who?
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah, the American essayist. And he's written...
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
Yeah, I mean, his book that everyone should read is called Between the World and Me.
Sure.
And it's him writing a long letter to his teenage son about what it's like being a black man in America.
Yeah.
And exploring all the difficulty of being a black body in a space that is white supremacist, you know, and what that reality is about.
Sure.
And he's just a very charismatic interviewee and public speaker and essayist, and he's really like become...
Oh, wow. I don't know about him. He's got books even.
He's brilliant. He's
Okay.
like, you know, he's like a sort of James Baldwin of our times and one of my favorite sort of thinkers of our generation, but also like a great speaker.
Sure.
And so he's popular on the speaking circuit in the States. And there was a black girl in one of his talks that put her hand up and said, listen, on this question of using the N-word, you know, there's a problematic question, who can use the N-word? And I don't know who can use it, whether us as black people can reappropriate the word. Should we sing along to rap lyrics that use the N-word, use words like the B word if you're a woman?
Sure.
Whether we can do it as black people, I don't know, she says, but sure as hell we know that white people shouldn't use this word.
Yeah.
But I don't have the language and the argument to give to my white friends for why they shouldn't use it.
Sure.
Can you help me out as Ta-Nehisi Coates, the race expert? And he gives a long answer, but the gist of it, which is quite funny but also insightful, is he says, listen, man, you know, one of the things we should say to white people is, what do you lose by not using the N-word?
Sure.
Like, tell me why you're so hell-bent on having a vocabulary that includes the word. Like, if your vocab is -1
Sure.
because of what we are triggered when that word is uttered,
Sure.
out of interest, forget freedom of speech, First Amendment, what, just at a deeply personal level as an individual white person, as Helen Ziller, how is your life diminished if you can't use this one word? Just between you and me. From me to you as Karen, if you just don't use the K word, how is your life diminished? What is the point in relation to your question? If you have a problem with trans people saying there's a mismatch between my biological body and my gender self-expression, what the fuck do you lose in letting that person go through that journey, including a redefinition that Home Affairs agrees with, and any kind of medical, psychiatric, as well as whatever surgery they need to undergo to align their psychological self with their bodily self? My question to you is, the person who says, where do I draw the line? Why do you want to draw lines? And how is your life diminished if instead of drawing a line, you go to the pub and watch the soccer instead and let the trans person just get on with doing what they want to do? Why are you invested in that question?
Sure. Oh, is that not rhetorical?
It's rhetorical to all of us. Like,
Sure.
That is the answer.
Sure.
When you say, where do I draw the line? Why the fuck are we having a conversation about a line that should be drawn? Why are you invested in that question?
Sure.
Go and catch up on that book that you haven't finished reading that's sitting next to your bedside. That's a more interesting use of our time than me needing to deal with you saying, but where will we draw the line? So it's really important to ask this meta question. Why am I obsessed with this question that I'm having at the dinner table right now?
Sure.
Why do I get upset that Joanne wants to become Joseph?
Sure.
Why is my BP going up that Joanne wants to have gender reassignment surgery? That for me is a far more interesting introspective question to spend time on than to say, what is this world coming to? I mean, I can accept Eusebius sleeping with Subu, but Eusebius wanting to become Mary Ann, no.
Sure.
Like, what makes you the moral police? You are no different to Verwoerd not wanting black and white people to sleep together. You know, your fear of someone undergoing surgery to align their psychological self, their gender identity with their bodily self. Any nasty feelings you have about that's just yuck for me is no different to a white supremacist getting really upset at the thought of a black and a white person having sex. It's in the same WhatsApp group.
Sure. Thank you very much, Eusebius. You mentioned Ukok Helen. It would be so amazing to get Ukok Helen here. Would you vote for the DA? How do you feel politically now?
A lot of people who bought my book were disappointed that I never answered the question.
Sure.
And it was really just an examination of different parts of the DA.
So you never answered it?
Not directly.
Okay.
And the reason I didn't answer it is really boring. Is that I hadn't resolved to myself whether it's okay for a political analyst to be clear about who they vote for and don't vote for, or whether that compromises how you might be received in your as a commentator. That's the reason why.
I'm thinking about soccer now with Robert Marawa. What if he's like supportee? Would we listen to him objectively moving forward?
And it's different in different countries. I mean, there's a British commentator, a very popular young guy, Owen Jones, who supports Labour.
Sure.
And specifically the left wing of Labour. And he's still well respected because he's smart, he does his work, he's empirically rigorous, he's a great speaker, a great writer.
Sure.
So his place in British discourse isn't undermined by that.
Sure.
But I wonder how our public would react if I told them who I voted for.
I'll tell you how they react. The same way like I said earlier when I said he's a controversial figure because of race politics in this country. As soon as you say I'm this, I'll tell you as black people, when I criticize something that Julius Malema says, EFF supporters go at me. You criticize a Cyril Ramaphosa, Jacob Zuma fans, they don't even want to listen to your rationale.
I'll tell you this much, but I hope this is enough juice for your show. I would never vote for the ACDP.
Jeez.
I can't vote for homophobes.
And they use religion.
Which is nonsense. We don't live in a theocracy. We live in a secular state. The ACDP is homophobic.
Sure, openly.
And they want the constitution to be based on the Bible.
Sure.
We should live in a country where Christians can be Christians, but not where Christianity is the constitution. So I don't vote for the ACDP.
Sure.
But as for ANC, DA, and EFF, at some point, I guess I should be honest, and analysts should be honest. But the question is back at you, at the viewer. Do you have the maturity to live in a country where your commentators, your journalists, your writers, your podcasters tell you explicitly where their loyalties lie?
Sure.
If you do, then we can have more fun, more honest conversations.
I personally don't think our population is intelligent enough. Without dissing them, I don't think we're politically literate enough. You spoke about Manifesto as a book. I don't think our people read manifestos. I don't think they understand the power of politics. I think a lot of it is cult worship. What's cool, what's trending, etc., etc.
With what you've just said, how do we make people follow and vote for political parties for their ideologies and their pillars that they represent
Logically,
as opposed to whoever they put in front as a popular face and how much money they spend on their campaigns, you know?
So this brings us back, I suppose, perfectly towards the end of our conversation to where we started. Our politics is broken, man. Political parties the world over have got too much power in society. I think instead of like us voting on the basis of reading manifestos, we have a far more fundamental, urgent question to deal with as citizens. And that is to ask ourselves, how can we diminish the power of political parties in the world?
Jeez.
Because political parties are not serving us. So, should you feel guilty that he is accusing you of not reading manifestos? Not really, because the political class have turned out to be a disappointment as a class anyway. I think the more interesting question we can maybe tackle on another forum as a question that deserves 2 hours of its own is, how can citizens wrestle back power from the political class?
Are the politicians not consolidating power with what we saw with the lockdown and COVID? It looks like they're actually consolidating, and it's going to get worse.
I've been watching the World Economic Forum, and
Yes.
what they're voting for, it looks like for me, is for them to be on the verge of saying, there's a pandemic, and
Shut down.
then there's a shutdown and lockdown, and there's certain rules that take place, and then the country goes not on autopilot, but WHO comes to take over for that period of time. Do we still have sovereignty, or do countries in the world still have sovereignty based on what the world leaders are currently voting for at the World Economic Forum?
Yeah, absolutely. And then the question then back to us is, are we going to write strongly worded letters to the editor, or are we going to get involved in the political processes and contest for political power? Or, as civil society broadly construed, are there different ways in which we can rearrange the affairs of the state? But whatever we do, the status quo isn't working for us.
Sure.
You know, and just because you were born into a world in which political parties exist doesn't mean that it must always be like that. And the reason why I punted Songezo Zibi's new book Manifesto,
Sure.
not because it's perfect and it's going to be a silver bullet. It just opens up conversations.
Sure.
And it agitates us to remain uncomfortable with our own retreat and our own silence.
Sure. I want to ask you a personal question, and I hope you can give a summary. The ordinary citizen out there who wants to take back their power, what can they do today? Because I say things like get weapons. What do you think, in your personal opinion, people should start doing now? Before we have the conversations and we come up with a plan, but just what can I do today to rely less on government?
Oh, that's...
I know you said it's a broader question.
No, it's not a broad question. It's a very precise question.
No, I mean, there's a broader conversation.
Conversation
Sorry.
to be had.
Sure.
The reason why the question doesn't have a pithy answer is because the government has a monopoly on tax collection,
Yes.
creating laws and policies, and using lawful force. And so the question of being independent of government always makes me a little bit uncomfortable, because government doesn't deserve us to try to be independent of it, given how much of our money they have and how much lawful power they have to create laws and policies, and how much of the security in the country they control and that they can use against us and repress us, even in a democracy.
Sure.
So there are many things we can do privately, and we do it as the middle class anyway. We opt out of the state by sending our kids to private schools,
Yes.
by getting ADT, high-tech in Grahamstown.
It is high tech.
Jeez, you know, by having Discovery behind us in case we get ill.
Sure.
We do that anyway.
By forming the Afri Forum.
Afri forums and whatnot.
It's
Exactly.
It's a
Yeah.
parallel
Yeah.
existence.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
and politicians, to your point, Sabu, exactly, they love that, because it entrenches, it consolidates their arrogance and their hubris and their lack of regard for citizens.
Sure.
A looting politician would love us to spend the afternoon answering the question, what can I do to be independent of the state?
Sure.
Because it gives them more space to continue to eat at the trough.
Sure.
So I'm dodging your question, but I hope I've justified why.
Sure. No, I hear you. No, thank you. It was just my personal, because I know we're speaking ESCOM now, going off grid. You've mentioned the example of the private space, where democracy, where school is free in this country. People don't know that. School is free in this country. So when you're paying school fees, you're paying an additional tax. Healthcare is free in this country. So if you've got medical aid and you're, and for me, part of the sadness is the same political class has shares in that parallel system. So not only do they bully us with the social welfare, which has gotten bigger, where almost half of the country now is earning some form of a grant, but additionally, they also make money from the private. So you'll pay tax to the politician, and you'll also spend money for private services that he has shares in. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
I think it's been incredible. I don't know how much time he has. For me, I don't mind going on.
I can't believe how long we've been speaking.
I know, bro.
Because whenever I look at your episodes, I'm like, these episodes are long. But time flies once you're inside the conversation.
Yeah.
Sure.
Somebody sent in a comment on one of our episodes and said they even gave us the number of hours they spend since this year started on our podcast. But then they're also saying how much value they've extracted from this podcast.
Yeah.
That's great, man. That's really,
And I think
awesome.
that's really, really awesome. And it also shows you where the world is right now. People are willing to spend their data where it's worthwhile.
Sure.
Absolutely.
True value. True value. After this episode, for example, people are going to be thinking, I hope people will be thinking. Eusebius, I think in a lot of the answers he gave, is very passionate about getting people to think differently. More than telling them what to do, it's just open up your thinking and process slightly better, more refined. So people enjoy that because it's not here, eat this. It's, you know what, have you considered playing around here?
Yeah.
And for that mental stimulation is powerful. So thank you
agree
from
with
my
you.
side.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Abafana base Rhodes.
I think
Abafana base Makan.
Rhodes. Do you know what I'm going to do? Let's leave it here.
Sure.
So that we can open up for part 2.
Yes. I'm looking forward to some of the comments, to some of the conversations.
Yes, that's what I was about to say. That if this was live, us getting comments and hearing what people are saying, we could go on.
Sure.
But I think maybe let's pause and let's absorb what they're saying. Let him read also the comments.
Let's do that, yeah.
And let's give
And
it
then
another
engage
couple
it,
of months.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Maybe summertime or early next year as well. Not even next year, a few months down the line.
Sure.
Now, if we do it in summer, what excuse will we have for the blankets?
So let's do a part 2.
Daunting, and I just want to say from my side, sitting with 2 radio legends, I'm inspired. Yes, there's a community out there, but I'm also just a gent. I'm also learning, and I appreciate the 2 of you for sharing information about an industry some of us know nothing about. So thank you for that very much from my side, and I appreciate the wisdom. And as you said, both of you are mavericks. The ability to evolve, which I'm hoping some of your peers are going to learn from and be like, I once sat watching Eusebius and Spoo, and I was like, maybe I mustn't just hog this thing, and I must be malleable.
Sure.
And move with the times, because there's an audience out there. There's different things out there. So if my objective is to get to people and add value to them, let me be teachable. But from my side, thank you so much to both of you.
No, thank you.
And especially to you, Eusebius, for being our guest today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So before he leaves, let me just say this quickly. Because I've worked on Y, on Metro, on Ukozi, and
you're an ancestor.
He is. That's why he looks like this, like a
but
tree.
I'm still 10 years younger than Oskido, 10 years younger than Mahuta, 10 years younger than DJ. I'm still a lighty, bro.
Jeez.
But let me just mention this. So because of the culture where I come from in radio, and the politics and the competition, and rightfully so, and understanding how the industry is to operate then, you wouldn't just easily be a YFM DJ and get an interview on Metro, or you wouldn't just easily be a 702 guy and just be, you know what I mean? So my first 702 interview was him.
Sure.
And it wasn't just an interview to come and talk about an album I was dropping, to come and talk about More Fire. He invited me on his show, and he didn't give me just 5 minutes.
Sure.
He gave me a long period of time to come and express our work as the Sibusiso Lope Education Foundation and the impact that we're doing in the communities.
Sure.
So for him to recognize the work we're doing at that time, and for him to bring in a personality that was on another radio station, and his bravery to be able to do that, he was not even aware. I was just a guest.
Sure.
I just want you to know, thank you, bro.
No, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks for everything you've done in the industry.
Thanks
for having me on.
This is the Hustler's Corner.
What's with the bottle?
Shoot the other day about Ingolosi yao. Mkhukhu one, but that's something I've never seen before. Okay, right, starts walking. It's following the signs. Yo. Maga figure out since man, they've been waiting for him. It was never about the wings, Mfano. It's the fire in you. Yeah?